resistant, and obviously voting against bills when they get the chance to, but also promising a filibuster that will prevent the Senate from moving anything big. That doesn't mean that Biden has no options, but it does mean that it's going to be very hard to do this. Either they're going to have to undo the filibuster, number one. Number two, find some way to do this via reconciliation, which is how they did the American Rescue Plan. Or three, negotiate some sort of working agreement with enough Republicans to get it passed. I'd counsel, on one final note, that number three is a very dangerous game, because it was in negotiations with the Republicans during the Obama administration that many of the strongest components of Obama's proposals were lost. And so Biden should be very, very careful about the negotiations.
Yeah, he should be. But it seems to some extent that Joe Biden has learned some lessons from the days that Barack Obama was president, and he seems reluctant to give up. I believe just the Americans' job plan it comes in at $2.3 trillion. And that doesn't even count the secondary program, the American Families Plan, that comes in another $1.8 trillion. I believe I saw over the weekend that Mitch McConnell is willing to go up for a total of $800 billion, which is far short of what Joe Biden proposes. So it'll be interesting to see if he learned his lesson from his days in the Obama administration. We'll find out soon, I guess. Let's go ahead, John. Okay, we're having trouble with John. I should say that just to
Thursday
just to get, John's back. Okay, Johnny, there?
Okay, I'm here. If it's hello.
Yep.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
We hear you, John.
Terrific. I think we've gone. Have we gone without video
yes,
here?
We're just on audio now.
That should work out very smoothly. Let's do it.
Okay. Let's the first thing I'd like to chat about is that you published an interview you did with Congressman Jamal Bowman from New York City, who's part of the squad. And I read the interview, and my general impression is that progressives are happy with what Joe Biden proposed, but they'd like to do him a lot more. Why don't you talk to us about that interview?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things at play there. And Jamal Bowman is a new congressman from New York City and the near-in suburbs. He's hit the ground running as a very progressive member. And he was asked by the Working Families Party to offer a response to the president's speech. I interviewed him as he was preparing his response and then around that time. And what Jamal Bowman said, I thought, was a very wise and very nuanced approach to this. Very supportive of the president when the president's doing good things and noting many of the strengths of the American Rescue Plan, as well as the Jobs Plan and the Families Plan. And so really, in many ways, an ardent champion of what President Biden's done so far, but also a wise counselor. And Jamal Bowman is a former teacher and principal, so he's got the educator's eye, and he warns that if Biden doesn't keep going big, doesn't keep kind of pushing this out in the right way, there's a tremendous danger that the Republicans will kind of negotiate Biden down from the proposals that he's made. What Jamal Bowman says is you can't do that. You can't, show weakness with the Republicans, because if they think they've got an upper hand, they will go against you in a very aggressive way, as was proven again by not just the Obama administration, but also the Clinton administration. But secondly, that you have to meet the challenge of the moment. And the moment is one in which big proposals that actually do a lot to improve the lives of Americans are A, very, very popular, and B, very, very necessary. So what Bowman was basically saying is, yeah, keep doing what you're doing, Mr. President, but kind of turn it up to 11, do some more, because at the end of the day, this will work economically and it will work politically.
Okay. Now, today, this afternoon, Joe Biden is meeting with Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia at the White House. Actually, I'm going to pick that up after the break. Our guest in this half hour is John Nichols, who's the national political correspondent for The Nation. John has been talking about the progressive reaction to Joe Biden's presidency. We will have more of Deadline DC and more of John Nichols when we get back from these messages, so don't go anywhere. We're going to discuss a piece that John wrote about expanding the size of the U.S. House of Representatives. And also, if we get to it, we'll talk about Liz Cheney, too. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon right after these messages. So don't go anywhere. We've got plenty of good show and more of John Nichols to go.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
I want to get back to football games.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. My guest in this half hour is John Nichols, who is the national political correspondent for The Nation. John is here with us to talk about some of the recent pieces he's written for The Nation. John, The Nation, by the way, is a great publication. It's home to tenacious muckraking, progressive commentary. The Nation empowers readers to fight for justice and equality for all. It should also mention the author of a book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. John, let's talk about the article you wrote about the need to expand the size of the House of Representatives. Could you discuss that, please?
Of course. We've grown a great deal. We've grown a great deal as a country, adding about tens of millions of people, and most of our states have grown as well. And yet, we are told that we can't expand the size of the House of Representatives. We've just got to move representatives around. What that means is that a lot of Great Lakes states, as well as New York, California, they're going to lose representatives. Whereas southern states, particularly Texas, Florida, they're going to gain representatives. And so people just accept that as reality. What I point out in the piece is that this is only a relatively modern reality. Until the 1920s, we regularly expanded the size of the House with each new census. They stopped doing that in the 1920s when it became clear that the United States was changing. Frankly, it was becoming more urban and more diverse. And I argue that it's time to restart that process. And it's actually not hard to do. All you have to do is change one law, a very simple law, and the House could apportion itself to be a much larger chamber. I argue they should add around 100, 130 members. That's appropriate to provide equal representation nationwide. It also would provide a tremendous amount of additional representation for states like California, New York, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Okay. Do you think, and to point out, in the most recent the census report, I think says that Texas is going to pick up 2 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, and several states, as you mentioned, in Ohio is losing a seat. Maybe
Michigan, Pennsylvania, Illinois, New York, California, and West Virginia are all losing seats.
Yeah, and California is losing a seat too for the first.
Which is absurd, by the way,
Yeah.
because its population grew by more than 2 million.
Yeah, and I believe I read somewhere that New York ended up losing a seat because of a population shortfall of 89 people.
Right. New York's population grew substantially, but they were 89 people short of the threshold for keeping their same size congressional delegation. So just by this tiny margin, they're denied, the representation that frankly they deserve. And
Okay,
this is
John,
where,
we're going to go
yeah,
to take a quick break. We'll be
okay.
back with more of John Nichols right after these messages. Welcome back to Deadline. This half hour is John Nichols of The Nation. Welcome back to our radio audience. If you're listening, but you want to watch the show without the breaks for radio silence, you can watch us on periscope.tv at periscope.tv, Brad/Bannon. You can watch us on Facebook at tinyurl.com/BB Facebook Live. And you can also watch us on YouTube at tinyurl.com/Brad on YouTube. John, let's move ahead and discuss. You wrote a piece this week about Liz Cheney, the now maverick representative, Republican representative from Wyoming, who is currently, for at least the next day or two, the number 3 person in the GOP House leadership. But she's about to be deposed because of her failure to submit to the big lie that Joe Biden I was going to say tweeted, but tricked Donald Trump out of re-election in 2016. Liz Cheney is very, very conservative. But the interesting thing is they're going to replace her with a representative from New York who I believe is pretty moderate by Republican standards, at least. What's going on here anyway?
Well, as Mark Pocan, the congressman from Wisconsin, said, that this is what always happens in cults. The people who create the cult often end up being deposed by some of the folks they thought they were working with, and that's basically what you've got right here. Liz Cheney is an extreme right-wing, vicious and very crude political operative who has frankly mirrored Donald Trump in many of his statements, many of his attitudes, many of his policies. She has voted with Trump. She voted with Trump more than 90% of the time during his presidency, at a far higher level than Elise Stefanik, the woman who they apparently want to have replace Cheney. Frankly, at a higher level than Matt Gaetz or Jim Jordan or Mo Brooks or many of the most right-wing members of the House. And so Cheney has only fallen out with Trump because she has challenged this lie about the election. And more power to her for that. That's good. There's nothing. I'm certainly not going to take anything away from her for taking a stand on that. But I counsel people to be very, very careful in assuming that Liz Cheney is their friend. She's not. She is a mean-spirited and very destructive political player, much like Trump in many, many ways. It's just that at this point they happen to be on different pages, and Trump has the power, and that's the key to the whole storyline here, Brad, because the Republican Party has become the Trump Party, and where Liz Cheney still had a little bit of ego and a little bit of conscience and didn't want to go all in with the Trump thing, Elise Stefanik, who's actually split with Trump on many issues in the past, was willing to play that part. And so what you're going to see is, a little bit of shuffling of the chairs on what may be the Republican Titanic. They're going to shift out Cheney as chair of the House Republican Conference and shift in Stefanik. The only reason Stefanik is coming in isn't because she's good at what she does. It isn't because she's, a strong conservative even. It is simply because she's agreed to do whatever, Trump and Kevin McCarthy say needs to be done.
Wow, that's really weird. I think that you're right about the storyline. It's if you're a hardcore conservative but don't like Trump, that is a worse crime than being a less than ardent conservative who loves Trump.
That's
Which
right.
says something about the state of the current GOP. Anyway, let's go back to something we talked about at the beginning of the hour. Uh, Joe Biden is meeting with Joe Manchin, the fairly conservative
Mhm.
Democratic senator from West Virginia today. Now, Joe Manchin is the 50th vote, and Joe Biden needs Joe Manchin to support his infrastructure package. If Manchin doesn't, that means essentially to get it passed, Joe Biden will have to compromise Republicans. So, what do you think that conversation is like today?
Well, I can tell you what's going on. Look, Manchin favors a lot of infrastructure and in a pretty big package. And so I think what Biden's trying to figure out is how much he can get from Manchin. Like where they're going to find their common ground. Probably even talking about some things that Manchin wants, because there's no question that Biden needs him. The key area of debate or difference here is probably going to be around the $400 billion in the infrastructure plan for caregiving. And this is a fabulous part of the plan. This is a proposal to make sure that the people who give care to our elderly, to people with disabilities, are paid a living wage, that they're respected on the job, and that they have some option to join unions. It's a really, really good piece of progress, and the funding would come for all of this through expansion of programs for the elderly, programs for people with disabilities. And it does fit within infrastructure. This is the human infrastructure of our country. And this is the infrastructure of caregiving that makes it possible to do all these other things. It's really important for job creation. And so we know that the Republicans want to get rid of that. They claim it's not infrastructure. They also claim that it's just a liberal wish list. I think what Biden will be trying to do is convince Manchin that this is actually very, very good for an aging state like West Virginia, very, very good for working class people in West Virginia. And if he can succeed there, then Biden goes from a position of strength when he goes into meetings with Republican senators later in the week.
Okay. Let me ask you, this is probably the last question I have for you before you go. Right now, if you count the American Rescue Plan, which came in at close to $2 trillion, you're looking at another $4 trillion as part of Biden's Build Back Better plan. Would you have guessed in your wildest dreams that Joe Biden would have proposed $6 trillion in new spending?
Yeah. Look, I know that Biden has a good regard for the New Deal and for a lot of the historic images of the Democratic Party as a party of government. They went through some tough times during the Obama years when it was clear they went a little too small on things, and so he learned from that. But at the end of the day, would I have said to you a couple of years ago, I thought Joe Biden was going to really try to do a New Deal, that he was going to try and do a new great society, that he might well emerge as one of those rare Democratic presidents who actually gets that Democrats are supposed to expand the size of government and its reach and what it delivers to people. No, I think I would have been skeptical about it.
Yeah, I
And I
would.
would have told you more likely Bernie Sanders than Joe Biden on something like that.
Yeah, son of a gun. John, thank you for joining us today on Deadline DC. We eagerly read your pieces in The Nation, and I hope our listeners and viewers do too. We'll be back right after these messages with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
Thank you, John.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this?
Yeah, thank you, John.
Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the Ad Council.
We've got the Academy Awards, the Emmys, and Grammys. But what should we call the award for the most extraordinary performance by a corporate profiteer? How about the Sleazy, with winners getting a solid gold sculpture of a middle finger? There were so many worthy contenders, but one corporation exhibited uncommon callousness, so the 2021 Sleazy goes to Tyson Foods. The meatpacking giant has regularly run roughshod over workers, farmers, communities, and the environment, not to mention the millions of animals it fattens and slaughters. But the coronavirus pulled out the worst in Tyson's corporate ethic. Last April, its billionaire chair, John Tyson, ranted that health officials who were closing down several of his slaughterhouses that had become hotbeds of contagion were creating another crisis, a national meat shortage. Responding instantly, our corporate compassionate, burger-gobbling president decreed that meatpacking plants were crucial to America's national security and must be kept open at all cost. Trump's edict required workers to return to their jobs or be fired. Only there was no meat shortage. Indeed, Tyson and other giants actually increased their meat exports to China last year. Meanwhile, COVID rampaged through Tyson's factories. In its Waterloo, Iowa facility alone, a third of the processing workers were infected and at least 6 died. Which brings us to the corporate play that cinched this year's Sleazy for Tyson. Waterloo slaughterhouse supervisors actually knew that the back-to-work order would sicken hundreds, but not exactly how many. So, managers organized a winner-take-all betting pool on the percent of employees who would test positive. It was simply something fun, said one, kind of a morale boost. This is Jim Hightower saying the virus infected more than a third of the workers in the plant. Some fun, huh?
Welcome back to Headline DC. Brad Mann. We're going to start this half hour with a clip, and it's Jamie Gandel from CNN reading a statement by Representative Elizabeth Cheney from Wyoming, who is the odd woman out of the GOP these days.
Here's where she goes after Trump. We can't rebuild the party or the conservative movement on a foundation of lies. We can't embrace the notion the election is stolen. It is poison in the bloodstream of our democracy. The way we we win back suburban voters and keep all who voted for us in 2020 is with ideas and policy. We can't be a cult of personality. We can't whitewash what happened on January 6th or perpetuate Trump's big lie. It is a threat to democracy. What he did on January 6th is a lie that cannot be crossed.
That is a statement from Representative Elizabeth Cheney from Wyoming, who tomorrow or Wednesday is going to be deposed from her job as the number 3 Republican in the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives. The Republican minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, announced over the weekend that he was going to get rid of her, and he probably will. This half hour of Deadline DC is brought to you by my company, Bannon Communications Research, which polls for progressive issue groups, labor unions, and Democrats. Something is stinking in the party of Lincoln. Joe Biden's happy 100 days have been a sad time for Republicans. While the new president has unified Americans behind his proposals for building America back better, the Republican Party is consumed by conspiracy theories and the legacy, such sad legacy, of Donald Trump. Joe Biden brings out the best in Americans, and Donald Trump brings out the worst. While the 46th president moves the country forward, the GOP is consumed by conspiracy theories and looks backwards to debate the sad legacy of the 45th president. Trump hovers over the future of the Republican Party like a deep and threatening cloud that prevents his party from seeing the horizon. The GOP is whatever Donald Trump says it is. That's a problem because of severe public distaste for Trump and his presidency. You can read this column and all my columns to the Hill at muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. Now it's time for the provocative progressive political panel. Our guest panelist today is Edwith Theogene, Advocacy Director of Generation Progress. Edwith is the head of the youth engagement arm of American Progress. In this role, Edwith works to develop and lead efforts to translate the experiences of young adults in concrete actions to advance progressive policies and increase voter turnout. Joining Edwith on the panel today is progressive political activist Mark Grimaldi. Mark has worked for several Democratic presidential candidates, including Joe Biden. He is also active in campaign finance reform and efforts to promote cancer research. His Twitter handle is @Mark J. Grimaldi. Okay, let's start with this. Edwith, tomorrow or Wednesday, the Republican Party is going to unceremoniously depose Elizabeth Cheney from her number 3 job in the House Republican caucus. Now, the crazy thing about this is she is about as ardent, I was going to say, as crazy a conservative as you can get, but despite the fact that the GOP purports to be a conservative party, and she is about as conservative as she can get, she's about to get, dumped because she refuses to buy Donald Trump's big lie about being cheated out of the White House in 2020. What does this say about the current state of the GOP, Edwith?
I mean, it makes me very, very worried. I think some of the things that are interesting is that obviously I'm not here in support of what the party stands for, and that they have a weak foundation is okay with me. But the sad part about it is that in order for us to have a functioning democracy, we need a diversity of ideas, we need a diversity of solutions. So the threat of the Republican Party not being able to survive this moment and to really become a party that is focused on ideas and policy and not personality. Like, it's so sad that I was listening to the quote that you were reading off and I was like, oh, I kind of agree on that. I think that's probably the only thing we would agree on.
Yeah, it's a very strong statement too, I thought.
Yeah, it is a very strong statement. So it's just fascinating, though, that the party is changing into one that just rallies behind Trump and so strongly. So I don't know, like it's a fascinating moment considering where the Republican Party came from and how, where we are today, how polarizing everything is.
Yeah, it really is. Mark, care to comment on Liz Cheney's demise?
It just goes to show you that this is, the members of Congress, for the members in Congress, in the House, obviously, in particular, but I would suspect in the Senate as well, this is still Donald Trump's party. Those who dare to cross him by simply stating that, you shouldn't have an insurrection are thrown out of a leadership position, which is absolutely insane. And her comment that the election wasn't stolen. One is an indisputable fact that the election was not stolen, and two seems like a litmus test for sanity, and democracy, which is that you should not support an insurrection. The fact that those two statements would get you kicked out of a leadership position tells you all you need to know about today's Republican Party. It is still the party of Trump, and for Trump, it's whatever serves him. So I don't think those things have changed, and this is the first, I think, big test because there really hasn't been any primaries where, you could see one candidate versus another. And in some ways, this is almost more of a litmus test than a primary, because in a primary, you could argue, oh, well, the candidates have other things to offer besides whether Trump supports them or not. But in this case, it's simply, can this person stay in their leadership role by making these two, common sense statements that I outlined? And the answer seems to be no, they cannot. So I think it actually speaks stronger than a primary where Trump would throw his support behind one particular candidate over another.
Yep. Edwith, this morning, the Associated Press released a new national poll that showed the president with a 64% job approval rating. It seems to me that after battering Joe Biden all during his presidential race and in the first few months of his presidency, the fact that Joe Biden has a 64% job approval rating is pretty compelling. Why do you think the president's job rating is so high?
I mean, I think with like a lot of the economic recovery plans that he's implemented, he's really come on strong. Like he took on a presidency with so many problems, a global pandemic. At that point, too, when he became president, we knew that there was going to be a huge crash and there needed to be a very strong, swift action in response to how do we rebuild our economy. So a lot of the plans that he's implemented have been really monumental. I mean, the majority of people who've lost their jobs and who've been greatly impacted by the global pandemic and this economic moment have been women and women of color. So a lot of the programs you've put into place, I think, have been like really phenomenal. So I assume that that's the connection between the jobs rating and the approval rate as well. So I'm excited to see what more he does in his presidency.
Mark, let me ask you this: the president. Why do you think the president's job rating is so high? I was surprised, honestly, when I saw this poll. I expected, most polls, have them in the 50, middle to high 50s, and this is higher than most. But why do you think Joe Biden has been a success so far?
I think it's what Edwith outlined, the economic plans that he has been putting forth, but I also think it's how much he's gotten the pandemic under control. As the headline of the poll notes, 71% of Americans approve of his approach to the pandemic, including 47% of Republicans, which is remarkable for 47% of Republicans to approve of anything that a Democratic president does in the age of Trump. So I know we're coming up on a break, but to me, that's the headline of the poll. I haven't seen any number of anything a Democrat does garner that much Republican support anytime recently since Trump became the headliner of the party.
Okay, we are going to break now. We'll be right back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and the provocative progressive political panel.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on, and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so...
For live stream.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. This is the provocative progressive political panel. Our guests today on the panel are Edwith Theogene, who is the advocacy director of Generation Progress, and our own executive producer and political activist, Mark Grimaldi. Edwith, let me ask you this. The AP poll, which we discussed before the break, shows that Joe Biden is getting excellent marks handling the pandemic. I mean, very good marks, close to 70% positive. He gets good marks, as you suggested, for handling the economy. But in sort of a troublesome sign, most Americans don't think that Joe Biden is doing a good job bringing the country together. Now, Joe Biden ran as a unifying figure who could bring the country back together. Is the fact that Americans don't think he's doing it, is that going to cause him problems?
I imagine it would, but I wonder what it means to bring the country together, right? Like we talked about earlier, we have a party that's having infighting right now that they can't keep it together, the Republican Party. And I mean, Joe Biden has released tons of executive actions that tackle discrimination, that tackle police brutality, that tackle, all kinds of things, which I think is monumental. So he's still just getting started, I feel, in his tenure. So there's still more time to figure out, how do we move this country forward and bring us together? But I do wonder, what do we mean by bring us together? Because before he started, and I mean, just with the Trump presidency before him, we were super divided before that. And I think he just threw a huge bomb in between this wedge that was in this country. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen at all levels of government and in so many different ways. So I think Joe Biden's just getting started.
Mark, what do you think? Do you think Joe Biden can succeed if Americans don't think he's bringing the country together?
I do. I think that number will have to come up. But another number that makes me think that can happen is that in this AP poll, 50% of Americans think the country is on the right track, which in that particular poll was the highest it's been since 2017. And there was another recent poll. I want to say it was from Gallup, maybe. You might know better than I do, Brad, but it showed Americans feeling the most positive about the direction of the country since 2006. So I think that number naturally will help to bring up the number of bringing the country together a certain amount. But I also think you're going to hit a wall at some point, because you also have people who, a huge percent of the Republican Party who channels in conspiracies and disinformation thanks to their standard bearer, Donald Trump. And as long as you have people who are living in a different reality, it's only going to matter so much what President Biden does, because they're not going to know that he's done it if they're not following the news from unbiased sources. So I do think that there's a wall there that eventually he will hit. But if he gets to that point, then I think it would be enough to propel him on to re-election.
We're going to take another short break, but when we get back, we'll have more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and the provocative progressive political panel.
All right, Brad, you're good to go.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. We are in the middle of the progressive political panel. Our guests on the panel today are Edwith Theogene, who is the advocacy director. There she is, the advocacy director of Generation Progress, which is the youth arm of the Center for American Progress, and our own executive producer, Mark Grimaldi. Let me ask you a question. The president has already got Congress to pass the $2 trillion American Rescue Plan. which consisted of individual checks, $1,400 checks to millions of Americans, also aid to states, cities, and towns to fight the pandemic. He has proposed another $4 trillion in spending, about half of it, a little more than half of that, for the American Jobs Plan, which would create new jobs and infrastructure like roads and bridges and internet. Here's also 1.8 trillion of that 4 trillion is in the American Families Plan, which would help American families jumpstart their own personal economies after the economic slowdown. Edwith, how much of that do you think Joe Biden is going to get? I mean, for example, today, Joe Biden is meeting with Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who is a conservative Democrat, is a little bit shy of some of the president's spending proposals. And I mean, Manchin is very important because if they're going to pass this thing with Democratic votes in the Senate, they need every Democrat on board, including Senator Manchin. I don't know what the conversation is like in the White House today, but if the president says, Joe, hey, listen, I'll tell you what, I know you're a little nervous about $4 trillion in new spending. I need you to support this bill, though, so I'm going to knock off several $100 billion from the $4 trillion package. Are you with me? Let's say the senator from West Virginia says yes. Is that going to provoke a firestorm among progressives who feel that Joe Biden is giving up too much to get this package passed? Edwith?
I mean, I would think so. It's really difficult to hear these kinds of conversations where you have it's politics, right? Like this party asking for this thing and then the negotiation happening behind closed doors. But it's like the average person who's struggling to feed their family and take care of their community, they don't care about that. So it's really hard for me to hear that. Like in my mind, I'm like, why is Manchin apprehensive of giving the American people what they need? And why does Biden have to negotiate to this extent? Because not only does he have to negotiate within his own party, he now also has to negotiate with Republicans as well. So it's kind of like that piece of the pie that we're all struggling for just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I would hope that there would be some sort of like backlash in terms of like what the negotiation looks like. I think we really need to center the people who are most impacted and the people who need the help, not the egos of political parties.
Well, let's put it this way. If you were the president, Edwith, and you may be someday,
I doubt it.
I don't know. But if you were the president, what would you say to Senator?
I'd vote for Edwith.
Yeah, I would too. What would you say to the senator if you were the president?
This is what the people need. This is a great package. This is just a start. Like, we're going to have to come back to the table. If this is not what, like, I'd be curious, like, what does Manchin want to see? What does he think the people need? You know, like there has to be some place of compromise, and a place of compromise that doesn't harm the people or put them in an even more negative state. Like this is a scary time. Like we're operating off of what we think will happen versus like what will actually happen. So I would hope, I mean, I'm definitely a person of values and like speaking to the heart. So, and Biden has already shown that that's something that he can do. So I hope that that comes through in his conversation with Manchin. I'm not sure if Manchin has a heart. I think he does. I'll take that back. But you get my point.
Yeah.
You know, I would try to appeal to Manchin and, you know, this is what the people of West Virginia need and this is what the country needs.
Okay. Okay. Let me ask you one more question because I asked this of Mark last week. But one of the things that surprises me is so far Joe Biden has asked, you know, he's got $2 trillion for the American Rescue Act. He's asking for $4 trillion more. One of the things that surprised me is last week, NBC News released a national survey, and it showed, much to my amazement, and I've been around a while, so nothing really amazes me anymore, but this did. After all that, and after Republicans are beating the crap out of Joe Biden all through his presidential campaign and through the early months of his presidency for being a big spending liberal, only 29% of the Americans in the NBC News poll described Joe Biden as a liberal, which amazed me. I thought it would be significantly higher than that. Why do so few Americans think that a very active and aggressive president isn't a liberal?
I mean, I wouldn't describe Biden as a liberal. I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like
even with $6 trillion worth of spending proposals?
Because I don't think liberal is just connected to like financial spending and budgeting, right? Like there are other policies and ways that I wish that Biden could be bolder and stronger. Like for instance, on reproductive rights and abortion, like I would like him to come out stronger for that. Abortion is under threat throughout this country. I mean, there's been like over 400 restrictions to abortion access. And I feel like when someone can control and decide if and when and how they build their family, it helps, support and define their livelihood. So I look at that as being like a big crux of a lot of ways that to me, like that is a defining point of being liberal, right? Like how staunchly do you come out for reproductive justice? So I don't know if it's more of like a social issues. It's hard to separate things like social and financial and like budgetary. But I mean, in order to put the issues and the programs that we want to see in place, like it all connects back to money, right? So I think like he has opportunity to prove that he's more liberal. And maybe it's like also, I just think there's other people that are way more to the left of him than he is. So that's why I wouldn't define him as a liberal. But I guess in comparison, like if you were to look at Biden and Liz Cheney, like of course he's like a liberal in comparison to her or in comparison to other folks within the Republican Party. But it's fascinating that this poll sort of revealed that the American people also have that kind of like understanding.
Yeah. Mark, let me ask you a different question. When, if ever, will the GOP be able to get over its its obsession with Donald Trump and get back to being a regular political party again, if ever?
Well, I think there's one main way that I think it would happen which is a distinct possibility, is if Trump runs again and loses again in 2024. And then I think you would see, the party, they would probably move on to someone else. Now, it might be someone like Ron DeSantis or someone who is basically, Trump light, for lack of a better term. And maybe then they transition, more towards principles instead of a singular person. But I think they're going to be at risk of this for a while because the party has been ticked towards that. Trump was a culmination of years of right-wing hate media like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and, just those types of things where they were in an echo chamber, and now social media has only exponentially increased that. I mean, look at the QAnon percentage of people in the Republican Party who believe the QAnon conspiracy theory or any conspiracy theory for that matter. I think they're very vulnerable to being duped. The voters are. Look at the fact that they didn't think that Fox News was conservative enough because their election night coverage called Arizona for Joe Biden, who ended up winning Arizona. And that was their litmus test, basically fall on bended knee for him or else. So I think that's the most likely scenario, but who knows if that would even do it.
Can I chime in on that too?
Absolutely.
There's always this question about like, when will the Republican Party be like its old self again? And when will it go back to being like Lincoln's party? And it's like, you have generations of people who only know the Republican Party as it exists today. They've probably seen it like grow into like from the Rush Limbaugh sort of like era and like all of that messaging and lies and conspiracy theories and like Trump being the culmination of that. There are people who only know and understand the Republican Party as that.
Edwith, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you to my guests today, Mark Grimaldi and Edwith Theogene on the panel. Also want to thank John Nichols from The Nation, who did the first half hour. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Thanks, Edwith. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you both. Edwith, thanks.